Yeah. Good night, Tobago. And we are here live in Tobago Update Studio for the first showing of 40 Hour for the year of our Lord 2024. Alright? I want to thank all the viewers for joining us tonight. And I want to thank you, all the viewers who have stuck with us through the last year 2023. And we promise that this year is going to be even greater than the last, and we have lots of things in store for you for 2024. All right? And you know, my journey on this program has been a great one where I feel I'm growing day by day. Each program, I'm getting more and more accustomed into the role, you know, of Mr. Moderator, they call me now. You know, they see me in the street, they say, Mr. Moderator. You know? So so I just wanna thank all the viewers for sticking with me, and thank everybody for watching and tuning and, you know, minding your business, as I always say Tobagonians ultimately need to do. Alright? What I wanted to start off this today's program by saying we had at the turn of the year, we had not so good news. I mean, I'm sorry to say that we had to start off the year on such a note, but recently we would have had the passings of two very important persons in public life here in Trinidad and Tobago, and that would have been former Prime Minister Mr. Basil Pandey and former Chief Secretary, our first Chief Secretary in the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Ho Choi Charles. And it was for me, it was a very heart-wrenching thing, especially the passing of Mr. Charles was a very heart-wrenching thing for me, because I knew the mission of Mr. Charles from since he was Chief Secretary to now, and I knew, and all of us in Tobago knew and grown, that he would have passed without seeing it come to realization. And we have a duty here, who he has left behind, to continue to try to get that, try to get and to help him realize and see that vision from wherever he is today. Now, my first encounter with Mr. Charles was way back in 1997 anybody want to guess my age now? You could guess it now. At the tender age of 5 years old. I'm a product of Golden Lane. Mr. Charles is a product of Golden Lane. Back then, I'm going to the Evangel Moravian preschool in Mount Thomas. And that was the time that I graduated from preschool in 1997. And freshly, only 1 year into his office, Mr. Charles came and attended my preschool graduation. And at that point in time, I was valedictorian. And I would have given my speech and all of that. And I was told after, because I don't remember them telling me, I was told after that everyone was so impressed, and he was so impressed with how articulate I was. And going down the years, I always thought that Mr. Charles, and I always admired Mr. Charles, and this is when I actually took interest in public affairs and politics. I always knew that Mr. Charles knew more than we gave him credit for, you know. And so tonight we just want to dig deep into the mission that Mr. Charles left us behind to carry on, all right, as it relates to Tobago autonomy and our self-determination here as an island. We're going to talk about the context of which things were said at his memorial service that took place recently in Shore Park, and we had some remarks being made by very prominent members of our society. And so we are here, we gathered our panel tonight to discuss that and really excavate some of the points that were made there and what we can take from it to move forward and advance the discussion. You know, it's no secret that I am a major proponent for Tobago autonomy, right? And so anytime I have these discussions, I am very, very excited. I'm very, very enthused. All right. So with no further ado, I want to introduce the panel tonight. All right. So the three panelists are no strangers to this show, right? We want to start off the year in a bang. All right. So we have Mr. Barry Nelson. He's a political activist. We have Mr. Lance Ogis. All right. Also a political activist. We have Mr. Max James, former assemblyman and former THA secretary. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Yo, give me that Mr. Moderator name and it's stick now.
Yes, man.
And every time I go in public, is Mr. Moderator. Every time. Right? But, guys, welcome. Happy New Year. I wish nothing but the best for you and your families for the upcoming year. Nothing but blessings for you guys. But
same to you as well, sir.
We started off the year on a not so good note when it comes to our dearly beloved heavy ruler, Mr. Ho Choi Charles has passed, and we would have had the memorial service moving on his homegoing service. And you know, when we saw just the massive amount of outpouring of respect for the man, right? We had the highest officers in the country present at his funeral, and all of them had nothing but nice things or respectable things to say about Mr. Charles. All right, and that should tell you about his general contribution. Now, Mr. Augustine would have spoke, and he would have outlined a number of things that were put in place to honor Mr. Ho Choi Charles' name. All right, I'm just going to list a few of them. He finally was able to bestow the Tobago House of Assembly Award Gold on his family, all right, posthumously. The street that he lived on in Old Ground in Golden Lane was named Ho Choi Charles Heights after him, and this was even before its death, but it was recently, within the last year. And also, one of the major things that the administrative complex in Cudler Hall will now be renamed after Mr. Charles. All right. So, just wanted to ask, do you think enough has been done to honor his name and his contribution, or should we do more? What do you think, Mr. James? Mr. James, we're going to start with you. I know that you work directly with Mr. Charles. You all rub shoulders in the assembly. You know, I can say rub shoulders. You all collaborated because you all on the same side. But you know, you would have worked extensively with him during your time in the assembly.
Well, I was completely good night to the viewers and to my fellow panelists. I was elated to see the level of, and I use this word, endowment placed upon him and his legacy. So I have no quarrel with that at all. I'm happy for what has been done. But I did see on another time, earlier this year on another program, I believe something more can be done, ought to be done. That it, in my view, for example, the hospital. My argument against the complex is that the administrative building can be moved. Well, maybe it might be carried with him wherever it goes to. But I think for the work that we did, trying to get that hospital up and running, and the work that was put into it, just as we have Eric Williams being given so many accolades,
Yes.
I think a more fitting tribute will be to have the hospital named after him. So that is my view. But I have no quarrel so far with what has been done. I think it's all appropriate.
Right. Mr. Nelson.
Good night to the viewers. Happy 2024. Health and strength. Once health and strength, anything could be achieved. My fellow panelists, good night. It was very sad for me because I've gotten to know Mr. Charles very closely, because I would have went up for 2 or 3 elections under his leadership. And it's very ironic that that he passed on the 31st, and the day after Basdio Pandey passed.
After, yeah. I found
And
it very ironic.
and if anyone remembers, he, as you mentioned, he was the first chief secretary, and at the point in time when he was chief secretary, Basdio Pandey was the prime minister. And they were the lock-ons. This is where where Mr. Charles would have complained about the underfunding of the Tobago House of Assembly, and he would have taken the government then, which was led by Basdio Pandey, to the DRC and so forth. And you have to remember that when Charles included, he was in the executive council when they won that election in '96. Mr. Charles did the A.N.R. was still together, I think. They were, yeah. So we were party together. And and to Hochoy, he decided that if Tobago is not treated well, no matter what relationship he had, Tobago comes first. He's Tobago first, and then after. But if anybody know Hochoy Charles, I beg to. If anybody know Hochoy Charles, I beg to differ on how you intend to honor him in terms of the hospital and the
admin complex.
Mr. Charles would not have wanted those achievements. As you mentioned, finally he would have gotten the assembly goal thing, and that he didn't accept it because that wasn't what Mr. Charles was all about. Mr. Charles I consider him a freedom fighter, a person who liked fairness, who was about fairness and equality. And I think the best way to honor him is to have a library, because everybody used to describe him as a walking library from a political standpoint. And I think that we should have a library where we now begin to have the political history, so that our children and those who before could understand the political history of Tobago and have a greater understanding how important the autonomy and self-governance is important to the island and people of Tobago.
Mr. Ogis, how are you doing? Good night.
Good night. Good night to our viewers. Good night to my colleague panelists. And if I'm to borrow a phrase from the recent Hochoy Charles homegoing service, I'll say all protocols observed. That appears to be one of the road march tunes at that ceremony. In terms of have we done enough? At the chance of singing familiar, I am not uncomfortable I am not uncomfortable with where we have started.
Okay.
I am very comfortable with the complex being, named after him. And I am convinced that when the THA purchases its first fast ferry, they will name it after
Mr.
Dr.
Charles.
Charles.
Oh yes. So one of the persons who worked very closely with Mr. Charles, I'm speaking about Mr. Aswell Jack, who was the former minority leader of the assembly. I don't think I ever heard Mr. Jack speak so passionately. Maybe because I wasn't really looking at the politics back when he ran in the 2010 elections and before. But I've never seen Mr. Jack on a platform that was so enthusiastic, so passionate. And I really enjoyed listening to him as he spoke about his time with Mr. Charles, the work ethic, what they were able to accomplish, right? At that point in time, he would have mentioned that even though the development budget, and I'm sure Mr. James here would remember, the development budget back then, now it's 200 and somebody million. No, back then it was only 37. All right? And still, Mr. Charles and his administration was able to use those funds and stretch it to develop Tobago so much in the one term that he was there, that we enjoy even now, which would have been how many, more than close to 20 years, or more, yeah. More than 20 years later. All right? One of the things Mr. Jack would have outlined was that the road building, infrastructure, even though that the money wasn't there, he still was able to start some of these major roads that we know and enjoy. And even after that, no roads were being built after that. Right? So I just wanted to ask Mr. James, what are some of the things or some of the constraints that you work with Mr. Hochoy and you still were able to get things done? Because I think the example for that is very poignant, because we not to say we need the resources, but we also need to be able to capitalize on the resources that we're given.
All right, so let me give a little context to that. And this is like correction. When we won the elections on the 9th of December 1996, Basio Pandey was UNC. We were A.N.R. at the time.
Okay.
However, when we won the elections, the process of governance began. And I remember as a secretary for Labor, Corporates and Consumer Affairs, and a few of the other secretaries, I was the smallest division at the time. And the question of staffing and the public administration issues came immediately to the front. Because we didn't have the staff, we didn't have money, we had nothing. However, a new act came into being, and we had to prosecute that. We had to make it happen. And I think I had 2 persons in consumer affairs, 3 in cooperatives or foreign cooperatives, and none in labor, except some officers who would come from Trinidad from time to time. I think I had 2 in labor. Yes, right. So we had that. So what faced us, we had to invite public officers to come across in respect of promotions and on contract on grounds of public service, so that they could serve for a particular period. If they wanted to stay as contract officers, fine. But it didn't work out that way because there's tremendous resistance and people did not know the act and what it meant a lot of people felt that if they came across as a contract officer or worker, they would lose all of their superannuation benefits when the time came.
Right.
And so there was a lot of misinformation. They didn't understand the standing orders, the finance rules and all of that. And then the whole process began through Dr. Morgan Jobe, who was the Minister for Tobago Affairs, to accept recommendations for the outfitting of the public service here in Tobago at the particular time.
Right.
He never reported anything, I think, until 3 years later, almost it was the end of our term. So that is how the influx of contract employment came about. Because we couldn't employ people through the public service, through the DPA, and so forth. Again, because all those positions were filled so far, and they were waiting. We were waiting on the report from Dr. Morgan Jobe, having to go through cabinet to create new positions. So the only route to us prosecuting our new duties under the new act was to put people on contract employment.
Okay.
And then came in a series of explanations through my division, try to assuage the fears of public officers, because a lot of, even to this day, people feel that a contract officer can't give them an instruction and vice versa. So they're saying, don't give them an instruction. I ain't taking no instruction from a contract officer. But there's something in the law that speaks to what you call the control tests, integration tests, multiple tests, and organization tests. Once the answers to those things are yes, then you have a worker within the chain of command. And you will see that when you apply those tests, that the workers are on contract of service, just as how the public officers are on contract of service. On the written paper, they are contract for service. But when you apply the test, they're on contract of service. So that a contract officer in law can give a public officer an instruction and vice versa. I think the issue needs to be put to rest. I mean, again, I'm inviting both sides to let not that polemic, that confusion continue, because that is settled. Right? But so we were faced with that, and it took us a very long time to fully staff our divisions. And then we had the issue of putting what you call the accounting the accounting units in place. And we had some senior officers who had retired and who were about to retire come into the mix, as we say, to assist us. And so we saw that that was one of the key challenges, because without a proper functioning public service, then you can't function. Right. So we were able finally to achieve that. And then one of the most important events was the whole question of the Dispute Resolution Commission being triggered.
Right.
And we were able to eventually surmount that. And as you could know, as you see, it's in existence today. And I think that the Prime Minister at that time, as I said another time earlier, was not a friend of Tobago.
Do you think that him challenging the Prime Minister at that time was eventually what led to him, Mr. Pandey, targeting him for him to
listen, if you're not financing us, if you pinch me, I might cry. Or if you put a knife on me, if you cut me, I'll bleed.
Right.
And the people that were around Mr. Charles at the time, including myself, I come from the trade union movement, we wouldn't take those things sitting down. And where that was a significant threat to our governance, we had to take the kinds of action that was necessary at the time to ensure that we didn't die in the process. Eventually, unfortunately, it happened in the PNM One Power later down the road. However, some died that others might live, right?
Yeah.
But I think that so we're enjoying all those the fruits of those political battles. And when I hear a particular secretary talking about the abolition, if you wish, of the public service, it worries me. Having fought as a trade unionist here in Tobago and in Trinidad to preserve the public service, you don't fight the public officers And that's what I'm seeing happening today. So when we fought to establish that and to entrench that, it really worries me when that secretary could say in public on this very network here, calling for the abolition of the public service. So we fought to have that in place.
Yes.
And anybody who is seeking to dismantle that, I have a significant problem with that person.
So we went from not having enough staff in some areas,
And then you calling for the abolition of the public service. I don't understand that. So those were the two things that were very important to us at the time. And as you could see today, the public service in Tobago is still not even enough to do the work. Yeah, I won't get into that tonight.
We won't get into that tonight.
It's still not enough to do.
I want to ask Lance
to do the work that is before them under the law.
Okay, Lance, what do you think was the biggest legacy left behind by Mr. Charles?
You see, and I'll answer it this way. At the homegoing service, the autonomy was a hot number, a hot seat. But the autonomy really is a product of the passion and the commitment of Hochoy Charles from the time he would have succeeded that mission for Tobago. And we are reminded that the autonomy is not something that started recent, in that the autonomy has a history. And this history started even pre-1962 in the likes of APT James. But I guess for us in this era, we focus from 1962, from independence
onward.
But we are reminded that there's so much history, and may I say that one of the things that we are reminded of is that currently Hochoy Charles and the current Chief Secretary would have registered their concerns and their pursuits for amendment to that final, that proposal document from the Joint Select Committee. And what is interesting is that the same system that would have failed us for 38 years post-independence, 1962 to 2000, we are reminded that Tobago would have received an average of less than 2% per annum of that national budget. And the current proposal by the Joint Select Committee of Parliament is just a revisit of the same system and the institutions that would have failed to represent and to advance the interests of Tobago. It's just a revisit. And I was very pleased and comfortable to see Hochoy Charles inside of the process as to when, I will use very complimentary term, when we had the disaster of that Joint Select Committee, bringing something that would have been towards the demise of Tobagonians. He has been there right throughout every single process. He never failed, never once refused to represent the welfare, the well-being, and the interests of Tobago, in spite of him not being in power at the point in time.
Right. And on that note, I want to just take a pause here. All right. When we come back, we continue the discussion on viewing Tobago's autonomy through the lens of the memorial service of the late Mr. Hochoy Charles. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Glass Supplies has been a leading name for over 37 years in the glass and aluminum market in Tobago. We provide an extensive range of high-quality, innovative aluminum and glass products for commercial and residential use. Competitive prices with superior and professional services by committed employees who are guided by rigid quality standards. Tobago Glass Supplies specializes in the manufacture and installation of glass and aluminum products that are essential to today's homeowners and the business environment. We are engaged in marketing, sales, and installation of a variety of products. These ranges from windows and doors to necessities such as mirrors for homes and vehicles, designed and manufactured in-house or imported.
All right, and we're back. And we want to continue the discussion on Mr. Ho Choi's legacy. All right, I want to put the question to Mr. Nelson now on what does he think is Mr. Ho Choi Charles's biggest legacy that he left behind.
All right. The biggest legacy. Okay. Let me answer the question in this way. Who get to know and work with Mr. Ho Choi Charles? Mr. Ho Charles was a naturalist and a person who he loves, who believes in nation building and fairness. I'll give you some examples. Remember when he had the coup? After he had the coup, I'm subject to correction. I don't know if it's before. He was junior minister, Robinson, after the coup. He went and be junior minister responsible for national security. So, so when the country was unstable and he left Tobago and then he left us and went down to help out Mr. Robinson from a national standpoint.
Right.
Mr. Charles always spoke about corruption. He always spoke about people who thief money. That there should be a murder. They should be charged for murder. I should tell you how he viewed corruption and how the state money supposed to be run. And I can remember in the 2010 election, I think that is where the PNM won 12-0. That was 2012. Yeah, 2012. Remember, at that point in time, the UNC would have won the national election. Yeah. They would have also won the local election. And Prime Minister Kamala Bissesa would have made a statement that is only one final hurdle to overcome.
Tobago.
And that is the Tobago House of Assembly election. Mr. Charles, at the point in time, called me and others to a meeting and explained to us. You know, Mr. Charles, I think what was it? I think it was tough. What was that? What platform at Truth or the Tough Da? Campaign against the TOP and indirectly got campaign for the PNM. Because he looked from a national perspective that you can't have one party controlling all the institutions of the country called Trinidad and Tobago. And we went out. I was a candidate in that election.
Mm-hmm.
And we went out and campaigned against Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, I prefer to put it not for the payment, but campaign against Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mr. Charles found it that in a multi-ethnic society of Trinidad and Tobago, you cannot have one party. And this is not a racist statement or anything like that. But in a multi-ethnic sector, that called Trinidad and Tobago, we can have one party controlling all the institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when you look at those examples, you find that this man was not he put Tobago first. Tobago always comes first.
Right.
But he was more interested in the unity, equality of representation and treatment of all races and people of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is what I admire about Mr. Ochoa Charles.
Right. Now, everyone who would have spoke at Mr. Charles's memorial service would have made the point that, and I mean, it could be a source of pride for Tobagonians, that everyone who is responsible or majorly responsible for getting us our autonomy would have been sat right there in the front row of Mr. Charles's funeral. Some might call it fate. I don't know what else some others would call it. But we would have had speeches from Mr. Augustine, Mr. Jack, who would have said and pointed out that everyone who is majorly responsible for us getting our autonomy sitting right here in the front row. And so we need, in order to realize Mr. Charles's mission, we're giving a call out to the persons, and we're talking about the Chief Justice, Mr. Ivor Archie, who is Tobagonian. You have the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, who is Tobagonian. We have the MPs for Tobago East and West, who are Tobagonians. We have the head of the Senate, who is Tobagonian. We had another independent, we had independent senators there as well, Tobagonians, right? And frankly, I think the only person in our front row who wasn't a Tobagonian is the president, right? But again, she was still there.
And I'm probably sure if you do some research, there's a possibility.
You know, everybody linking back, right? So everybody who was Mr. Ochoa Charles would have bought everybody who were the major players was getting our autonomy.
I think that statement is wrong. I mean, who are major players in us getting the authority in the future?
Right, in the future, right. Stand correct.
Not
right.
Not, yeah.
Now, Dr. Rowley went up.
No, and furthermore, I think Mr. Molinar was there.
Mr. Rhoda Molina?
Yeah,
Yes.
he
wasn't in the front row, though.
No, he was just in the back
Okay,
because
okay.
he came late and the front row was
Okay,
filled.
okay.
Yeah.
So that is
The
representative from the opposition.
yeah.
Right, good.
And he's one of the major
Yes, in
players.
the opposition. Yes.
Yeah.
I think Republic
Yeah,
the women's
yeah,
predecessor.
yeah.
Right, good. Now, Dr. Rowley went up, and one of the first statements he would have made was that, and he was very firm, Tobago will not get autonomy without the authority from the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago.
And he went and make a further step in. He made a further statement and said, the people of Trinidad will have to give Tobago.
Correct.
So,
Which is not the place that you want to be in.
to make such a statement.
Exactly. And it says, and it's something that a reality that I always knew, right? And all Tobagonians would have known this, that the hands of our future are in the, or future you're in the hands of Trinidadians. All right. Now, because you need.
I disagree with that, but I will explain after.
For the Constitution to move in Parliament, you would need a major majority, right? You're not getting that without the opposition. And when you're dealing with opposition members who thinking you have electoral districts in the rainforest, right? How can you begin to convince them why it is important, right, for us to get to autonomy? I want you all to give some thoughts or some feedback on those statements made by Dr. Rowley that basically this autonomy thing is in the hands of Parliament. Go ahead.
Yes, I don't know if I could start. Okay. The statement from the system of government that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, the Westminster system, is true. But before that could happen, Tobagonians have to understand how the political system works. And this is one of the things that I admire Hochoy for when he was first Chief Secretary. When we have the new dispensation Act of 40 of 96, with it being the first secretary, with his responsibility with the fifth schedule, with plenty responsibility, as Mr. James said. And I wanted to tell Max James that I wonder if he remember the last subject that was debated in the House, he was the secretary to debate that. That was the terms and conditions for contract workers.
The minimum terms and conditions for workers on contract in the Tobagos. I designed that.
Yeah, and that was the last debate before the House came to.
Well, not cutting them because I love to hear you, but I felt that having such a large body of workers unprotected, because the public officers, as we know, they fall under the public service.
Flattery.
So I had to protect them. And so we came up with the idea of having these minimum terms and condition workers on contract in the assembly, and also having to bring some kind of a parity and equity in the governance and the public administration, because you have the public officers having their protection under the Public Service Act and its regulations and so forth.
Okay.
So it was to bring that 360 sort of equity, and to ensure that the relationships between the two, quote unquote, two parties exist in a way where there would be little friction so that the government could run smoothly.
Okay.
Right. And what I admire about Mr. Charles then, that we had this new institution called the Tobago Assembly. And Mr. Charles wanted the people of Tobago to respect the institution, because this is our government. This was a milestone, although the act was not perfect. And Mr. Charles would have outriders with the cars and things. And people did not understand. There was a reason for that, is that he wanted Tobagonians to understand that the struggle from what my good partner was saying, it started with Bigat and APT James and by Robinsons, the Robinson and the Morris and the Palmer and Nicholson, that we had finally reached a stage. And this was a step, and we must respect the institution, the office of the Chief Secretary. And people used to figure that was a show of what he was playing and this kind of thing. That was to let to. I can remember Mr. Charles had plenty running. I was working CASA, and we were responsible for government ministers' transport. And I remember a day when he had a meeting, the assembly under Max. I don't know if Max was in that meeting. We had a meeting with Minister Kwaitong at Blackrock there. What's the call? What's the thing?
Beach.
Not Turtle Beach.
Grafton.
And we sent transport to pick up the minister to drop him to Grafton. And within 15 minutes, we saw before the driver reached, they were called for him to come and pick up the minister. So we asked what happened. When we asked the driver what happened, Mr. Charles and the executive council would have agreed on an agenda for a meeting. And when Mr. Crichton came, the agenda changed. And Mr. Charles, for what was said by the driver, there was not informed. And Mr. Charles said none of that. So Mr. Charles told who was responsible to make sure that they get something to eat, transport, to take them back. And the meeting was done. A second time, I can remember next time in the opening of the Heritage Festival in Shaw Park. I think that was the year when our esteemed teach sang Ring Bang, Ring Bang. I think it was that opening. The Prime Minister, the President, was invited to the opening. And Mr. Charles thought that the Prime Minister, which was Mr. Pandy, was supposed to come of the dignitaries first, then the President. And word was going around that they were waiting on the Prime Minister and the President. And word is, I don't know if that was true, that Mr. Charles refused to come before Basdeo Pandy, the Prime Minister. He's supposed to come first. Then, because we were hosting.
You were hosting,
yes,
correct.
And then. So these are the things that Hotroy fought for this institution that was a struggle for us as Tobagonians to respect our institution. But until we Tobagonians understand the struggle and how important the institution called the Tobago House of Assembly is, that. Look, for example, before I finish, remember they had a meeting in Lowlands when the Chief Secretary then, Mr. Charles, what's his name is? Kelvin Charles, when they had the meeting, when the Prime Minister said, imagine the Prime Minister could come to Tobago and tell our Chief Secretary to sit down. If I was on that meeting, that meeting would have an uproar. You cannot come and disrespect our institution. The minute would have, no, I'm telling you, they would have done right there. Yeah. So these are the things that Tobagonians have to understand. That until we respect the institution called the Tobago House of Assembly, Trinidad will treat us.
Yes, correct. Lance, Dr. Rowley also said the reason why the Tobago Autonomy Bill was struck down in Parliament was because it was during an election time. Is that your view?
I must confess that I have a challenge really accepting some of the things the Honorable Prime Minister says. Because information suggests differently. I also want to say from a different perspective that the Tobagonian has to see autonomy differently. No central government is going to hand autonomy to Tobago. It has economical and political consequences to Trinidad.
Correct.
And therefore, the Tobagonian has to understand that autonomy for Tobago is actually the Tobagonian being in control of the resources of Tobago. And historically, we must remember that the fight for Tobago has always been, we must remember the history of Tobago, there has the most bloody and ferocious of battles has been fought for Tobago by entities that are foreign to Tobago. The only difference today is that a foreign entity is still battling for Tobago, but against the Tobagonian currently in Tobago. And that foreign entity known as the central government.
Right. Max, Dr. Rowley talked. You wanted to respond to him? But I have a question to ask you.
Yeah, ask me a question.
Go ahead.
No, that's one of the joke is on me. Taking a tee off from what Barry said about understanding the institution of the Chief Secretary and secretaries and the Tobago Assembly Act. So I recall I recall, so I had my car, well, they give us personal drivers and all of that, but people don't understand what's going on. Let me just drop the template a little bit. So I happened one day to be going down to Works Department, as it was called then, came into the compound, and my driver, he opened the door, flew around, and opened the door for me. Who tell he to do that? Listen, man, a fella, the brother of the Papa said, he called his name. He said, "Oh God, I didn't see what going up there. Driver open door for Max James. I didn't see what going on."
All his big boy is nice.
You see, we have respect.
I said, "What the crap?" So another time, I have my car window screw up. Fella say, you see them fellas, the boy, he's driving in an air-conditioned car, and we out here taking the heat. It's pressure, you know. But I remember going to the ILO in Switzerland, and the Pakistani driver opened the door for Minister Patap. We went together on that mission. Before I could even think about opening my door, in a flash, he reached around to my door and opened the door for me. But in this country, we don't understand our protocols and our systems and the institutions that we have created. And so the assembly at that time took a lot of licks. A lot of the assembly took a lot of licks. Who tried to give up the outriders, right? And I care too less. Driver open, and why I didn't, because I was sitting in the back. But the child lock was on, so I can't open it from the inside. But he didn't know that.
Right.
And he see the driver open the door for me, and he was amazed. Well, not only he was appalled how that could happen. You understand what I said?
Yeah, but like commonplace for them, for the ministers and them, commonplace.
Listen, we are really jokers here in Tobago. You know, we don't understand. We just don't understand a lot of things.
Yes.
So if we don't take our institutions seriously.
So McKenna, who replaced me, he is what forced that. Them fellas say, hey, them men sitting down in air condition. When McKenna won the seat from me later on, he was like this. He hand cock up in the back seat, his foot across, right foot across the other part of this back seat there. And he lol off and we say back so. I said, look at that, them jokers. Hypocrites.
Right.
You're condemning me for a man opening the door for me. And he doing worse than that. Orville started it too, you know. Glass thing up. And he say, no, your glass was down. And then when he couldn't take the heat,
pull it up.
You had to pull it up.
Remember he used to, he never go in the market before he win in a ball. So remember he used to be in the market and so forth. No, that is good. But the whole point about that, we had a new institution that people at Mr. Bigot and APT, James and Robinson had fought for. We got some kind of some autonomy. We had to respect it. Let Trinidad understand well. Yeah, this was a hard fought, and the people of Tobago, and that is part of the reason that we in this quagmire here.
So the question to me,
we're wrapping up, right?
Right.
So Dr. Rowley would have said, he would have brought up the allegory of Icarus, the Greek allegory of Icarus, and the feathers.
Yes. I'm happy to touch on that.
Wings of wax.
Wings of wax. Is it that? Are we Tobagonians? I don't want you to put any word in Dr. Rowley's mouth, but there's the fear that we're flying too close to the sun, and if we crave all, we'll get none. So we should just take what we get.
It's I'm not as, I don't know how to be diplomatic as Lance, and I discussed this matter with one of my illustrious brothers this afternoon. And he says, you're one of those former trade unionists that call it and say it flat. So it's in my psyche, my blood, to call it a spade, to talk flatly. I think the Prime Minister was on nonsense. I think he was very offensive. Because he's putting into the psyche of Tobagonians that to achieve autonomy is asking for too much. So he's saying, take 3/4 loaf than no loaf at all, which is absolute nonsense. This, whether we are PNM, UNC, PDP, TPP, whatever, Tobago belongs to Tobagonians, and it is our God-given right to govern ourselves. In the United Nations Charter, every person, every nation has a right to govern itself. And this notion that Trinidad was give us it, I absolutely reject it and abhor it. That's the system. But it was the first time in my life that I had begun to seriously believe and see that we may never get the autonomy. We may have to, in fact, secede. Because I think the Prime Minister is bold-faced to think that our aspirations for autonomy is overreaching. It is our natural right. I want every child out there to know that autonomy or self-determination is your natural God-given right, and no Prime Minister, whoever he is. It makes it worse that I said Tobagoan is saying that. So this nonsense about flying up and the bees and the wax melted and the feathers fell off and fell to death is what he's trying to put into our psyche. Look, you're asking for too much. I think this bill is not the bill I would go for, even with the amendments, the last one, because we don't have time. I work with the information.
We will discuss it, obviously. We're discussing that. That's a major topic for the next quarter. We're going to discuss.
All right. So I think that what should go before Parliament is not all those multifarious issues. One small core of amendments regarding to the relationship between Tobago and Trinidad.
That will allow us
and you agree on that, and then we come back home and decide what form of government or governance should shape our destiny.
Right.
Rather than to be haggling over multitudinous clauses and having Trinidadians have a say in that. We don't have a say in what they will do in Trinidad.
Correct.
And I think that what the teams that will finally go back into the matter should concentrate on is those core issues, the relationship issues, president, money, foreign affairs, and those kind of things. But for on specific day-to-day societal governance, we should determine that. So I think we need to look at it. Time, and a lot of time has elapsed, and therefore we don't want them to be involved in the day-to-day governance issues. Let us deal in terms of what is going to go before the Joint Select Committee. Those very core, a very small bit of amendments. And then we come back home here as Tobagonians and determine how we want to live, and not how Trinidadians want us to live. I think the Prime Minister Tobagonian should, stop playing, and he needs to behave himself.
I would say to Dr. Rowley, coming down to the primary career, you have to leave a legacy. Give Tobagonians the biggest legacy you could leave behind is being responsible for finally giving Tobagonians the autonomy that we deserve. Right? But as I said to Mr. James, we will continue the discussion about Tobago autonomy. It's a major topic. It's going to be in the House this year, and so we have a responsibility here to continue to educate the public and air those discussions. All right, and so coming up in the next couple of weeks and months, we will see more from us. All right, but until then. Right, this has been Tobago Updates, live from Tobago Update Studios. My name is Edison Thomas. I want to thank the panelists for coming out. We'll see you again. Until then, until next week, Tobagonians mind their business. Good night.